I had been looking for my glasses for half an hour before I found them. I had been learning French for 2 years before I went to France. I had worked for the company for 10 years before I was promoted to manager. I took a cooking class before I prepared dinner for my family. I read the book before watching the movie. I had been studying French for 2 years before I moved to France. I worked for the company for a year before I was promoted. I had been looking after my little sister for an hour before my mother came home. I had looked at online reviews before choosing a hotel. We didn't realize how late it was. I hadn't eaten all day, so I was hungry. They hadn't paid attention and had missed their exit. Have you ever been to Paris before? We didn't plan to be this late. I had been studying French for 2 years before finally visiting France. Were they waiting long before we arrived? I'm so glad we decided to come here for dinner. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. I looked online to choose the dress I wanted. We had already finished our homework by the time our parents got home. I studied hard for the exam but still failed. They hadn't had lunch yet, so they were starving when they got home. I wanted to go to the party, but I didn't have a car. I called half an hour before I found my keys. Examples. I had finished my homework before he came. They left before I woke up. I had studied English before going to England. We had lunch before starting work. I talked to him before I met him. They finished the race before the sun went down. We arrived before you called. I had cleaned the house before they came. I had done my homework before watching TV. I took a shower before going to bed. We had prepared dinner before you came home. I had the baby to bed before I went out. I got dressed before I went downstairs. I fed the cat before I went to work. I did my makeup before leaving the house. I washed the dishes before he came home. I was out for a walk before the rain started. I had packed my bags before the taxi arrived. I finished my coffee before leaving the cafe. I had checked my email before going to bed. I had turned off all the lights before going to sleep. I put my phone on silent before the movie started. I had mailed the letter before I went to the shop. I locked the door before leaving the house. I had finished my work before I went on vacation. I took my medicine before I got out of bed. I made my bed before I left the room. I put on my shoes before going out. I grabbed my jacket before I walked out the door. I had my hair up before I went out. I applied sunscreen before going to the beach. I applied insect repellent before going outside. I put my bag in the car before going to work. I put the key in my pocket before leaving the house. I checked my wallet before leaving the house. I put gas in the car before I set off. I made a list before I went grocery shopping. Before going to bed, I plugged my phone into the charger. I had set my alarm before going to sleep. I put on my pajamas before going to bed. Before I went to bed, I put my book down. I had turned off my lamp before going to sleep. I said good night to my family before going to bed. I brushed my teeth before going to bed. I put on my lenses before I went to the party. I wore my dress before I went to the wedding. I did my hair before I went to my friend's house. I did my makeup before going out. I put on my jewelry before I left the house. I put on my coat before going out. I had been studying French for 2 years before I went to Paris. I was cooking for half an hour when I realized that I forgot to turn on the oven. I had been working on my car for hours before it finally started. I had been studying for the exam all week, so when I took the exam, I was confident. I've been wanting to try this new restaurant for months. So when my friends suggested it for dinner, I was excited. I've been hoping to hear from my crush for weeks. So you can imagine my disappointment when you didn't text me. Before I went to the store, I looked online for a new dress. Had lunch before going out to play games. I put on my shoes before leaving the house. I hadn't seen him in years. I didn't realize how late it was. I wanted to go to the party, but I was too tired. I searched everywhere for my glasses until I realized I was wearing them all the time. I studied French for years so I could speak fluently. I've been wanting to travel to Europe for years before finally taking the trip. I hadn't been to the movies in years. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't pay my rent. I had not eaten. I was looking for my glasses for half an hour until I found them. I looked online for hours until I found the perfect dress. I tried to call you 3 times before I answered. I had wanted to go to the beach all week before I finally left. Before I spoke to him, I thought about what I was going to say. I had hoped to see him again before he left. By the time he came, I had finished my work. I had been working on the project for weeks until I realized I was going in the wrong direction. The company had been in business for over 10 years before finally starting to make a profit. I had been living in the city for a year until I realized how big it really was. I had been taking guitar lessons for months and finally felt confident enough to play in front of people. I had been looking for a job for months until I finally found one. I studied French for years so I could speak fluently. I had been saving up for a new car for 2 years before I bought one. I tried many times for the football team until I finally succeeded. I searched everywhere until I realized I forgot my keys at the office. I've already seen that movie. I had lunch before meeting him for coffee. I had finished my homework before watching TV. I searched the internet for a new dress before I realized I didn't have enough money to buy one. I hadn't eaten all day, so I was starving when dinner was ready. He had studied hard for the exam, so he was confident while taking the exam. I tried to get into the football team, but it didn't work. I had already eaten lunch by the time my friends arrived. The flowers were delivered when I got home from work. I had been studying for hours until my mother came home. They had been playing video games for hours when I arrived. I had been cooking dinner for hours until my husband came home. Before I went to the store, I looked for a dress online. I hadn't eaten all day, so I was really hungry. I studied hard for the exam, so I felt confident when I took it. I had been studying French for 2 years so that I could speak fluently. I had lunch before going to work. I've been wanting to try that new restaurant for months, so I was excited when it finally opened. I was hoping to get a new car for my birthday, so I was disappointed when I didn't. I wanted a dress for the party but couldn't find a dress I liked. I looked online and in stores but couldn't find a dress I liked. I searched everywhere before I found my keys under the sofa. I thought of going to the movies, but I had no money. I tried to call you but your phone was off. I played tennis before joining the club. I had been to Paris before I met my husband. I had studied French before I went to Quebec. I had been waiting in line for 10 minutes before I realized I was in the wrong line. We studied hard for the exam but still failed. They had gone out to eat before they realized they had forgotten their wallets at home. I wanted to go to the beach, but it rained all day. She had baked a cake before she realized she had run out of eggs. Examples. We waited 10 minutes before the bus came. I studied French for 2 years before going to Paris. They had been married for 6 months before they had their first child. I wanted to go to the concert, but I didn't have enough money. I thought about going to the party, but I didn't want to go alone. I expected to see you at the game, but you weren't there. I thought you'd be at the meeting, but you weren't. I expected better weather, but it was raining. I had hoped to get a better grade in the exam, but it didn't. I wanted to buy a new car, but I couldn't afford it. I had planned to go on vacation, but instead I had to work. I tried to lose weight but failed. I wanted to quit my job but couldn't find another job. I had hoped to make new friends but failed. I tried to join a club but was rejected. I tried to treat people better, but it didn't work. I wanted to go to the concert, but I didn't have a car. I had planned to study more, but I did not have enough time. I was hoping for a promotion, but it didn't. I wanted to buy a house but I couldn't. I tried to save money but I didn't have enough money. I was hoping to retire soon, but I didn't have enough money. I wanted to travel, but I couldn't afford it. I was hoping to get a raise but didn't. I tried to be more organized but it didn't work. I wanted to go back to school, but I couldn't afford it. I had hoped to find a better job, but I couldn't. I had been studying French for 2 years before I moved to Paris. I had lunch before I started to feel sick. I was out of bed before I realized I was sleeping with my alarm. I had done the laundry before I realized I had forgotten my favorite shirt in the basket. I had walked to the store before I realized I had forgotten my wallet at home. I had been studying English for 2 years before I moved to the United States. I worked for that company for 10 years before it went bankrupt. I've been taking care of my little brother since my mom left for work. When I woke up, I had slept for 8 hours. I had been studying for 4 hours when I took a break. I had been working on the project for 2 weeks when I finally finished it. When I finally arrived, I had been waiting for the bus for half an hour. I've been wanting to try that new restaurant for months. So when I finally got there, I was really excited. I studied English for 5 years before moving to the United States. I hadn't seen my best friend in years before he showed up at my door. I couldn't find anything I liked, so I bought a dress I didn't really like. I searched for an hour before I found my glasses. I had been looking for my glasses for an hour before I found them. I had been studying English for 5 years before I moved to the United States. I had my hair cut before the party. I had finished my homework before he came. I was studying for hours before taking a break. I've been wanting to try that new restaurant for weeks before I finally left. I had been working on that project for months before I finally finished it. I had been saving up for a new car for years before finally buying one. I hadn't seen him in years. I had been working on the project for months until I realized I was going in the wrong direction. I hadn't eaten anything all day, so when it was time for dinner, I was hungry. I studied French for years before finally making my first trip to Paris. I had already eaten lunch by the time you came. I had cleaned the kitchen before I started cooking dinner. After searching for my glasses for an hour, I found them under the sofa. I wrote the article before I realized I forgot my laptop at home. Before my roommates came home, I cooked dinner and cleaned the kitchen. I had gone to bed but was still awake when my alarm went off. I was in Paris before I moved to London. I had cooked dinner before my husband came home from work. I called half an hour before I found my keys. I was looking for my keys for half an hour before I found them. I tried 3 times for the football team before I won. I had taken out the trash before I remembered I needed recycling. I had cooked dinner before he came home. I had been looking for a new job for months before finding a job. I studied English for years before I became fluent. I've wanted to visit Japan since I was a kid. Examples. They were out by the time I got home. I had been working for hours until I realized how late it was. I had prepared dinner, but I had not eaten yet. I tried to call him but he didn't answer. I wanted to go to the party, but I wasn't invited. I was hoping he would call, but he didn't. I had studied the language for years before I ever traveled to a country where it was spoken. I had heard of the company before applying for the job. I worked there for a year before I was promoted. I had already eaten lunch by the time they arrived. I've been waiting for hours but they still haven't arrived. I wanted to go, but I couldn't find my coat. I was looking for my keys for hours until I finally found them. I've been feeling sick all day, but I haven't been to the doctor yet. I've been wanting to ask her out for months, but I didn't have the courage. I was planning to go on vacation but I couldn't save enough money. I was hoping to hear from him, but he hadn't contacted me. I've been wanting to try that restaurant but haven't had the chance. I wanted to call him, but I didn't have time. I was hoping to see him, but he was nowhere to be found. I wanted to talk to him, but I didn't have the right opportunity. I was hoping something would change, but they hadn't. I was waiting for her to call but she didn't. I wanted to ask her out, but I didn't have the courage. I was hoping she would say yes, but she didn't. I was hoping to hear from him, but he hadn't contacted me. I've been wanting to try that new restaurant, but haven't had the chance. I wanted a dress for summer before I found a dress on sale. I didn't realize it would be this hot until I got to the beach. After searching for my keys for 5 minutes, I found them under the sofa. By the time I got to the store, they had already sold my size. I was so upset that I wasted my time driving there. I wanted to try on the dress before I bought it. I was planning to wear it at my friend's wedding. I had been working on my project for 2 hours before I took a break. I had studied for 4 hours before I took the exam. I had been waiting for my friend for half an hour before he came. I've been wanting to see that movie for months before I finally saw it. I've been hoping to buy a new car for years, finally got one. I studied English for 2 years before moving to the United States. I had been working on my car for 2 hours before I finally started. I've been wanting to try that new restaurant for months, so I was really excited when I finally went. I was hoping to get a new car for my birthday, but was really disappointed when I didn't. I had lunch before I started my homework. I slept at 10. I tried to call you yesterday, but your phone was off. I studied French for years before finally visiting France. I had been waiting in line for 20 minutes until I finally got to the front. I read the reviews before deciding to buy the product. I hadn't eaten all day, so I was very hungry. I hadn't seen him in years, so I didn't recognize him. We had been waiting for the bus for over an hour when we finally arrived. I had been working on that project for days until I realized I was going in the wrong direction. I had been studying for the exam for weeks but still failed. I had it for 2 years until my car broke down. We had been married for 10 years before we decided to have children. I lived in that city for 5 years until I finally found a job. I had been taking medicine for 2 hours until my headache went away. I've been trying to reach you for days but I couldn't reach you. I was planning to go to the movies with you tonight, but I can't go now. I had been studying French for years until I was finally able to give a speech. I was waiting in line for half an hour until I finally got my turn. I had studied for the exam, so I felt confident when I took it. I had been learning French for 2 years before visiting France. I had lunch before I started to get hungry. Before my friend knew me, I had my hair cut. I had run a mile before I started feeling tired. I had been saving up for a new car for years, so when I finally got one, I was thrilled. I had been looking for my keys for half an hour when I found them. I had finished my math homework before watching TV. I was wearing my pajamas before I turned off the light. The party had already started when we arrived. I had finished my math homework before my friend started hers. I studied for my exam for 2 days before taking the exam. I had been hoping to hear from my crush for weeks before finally speaking to me. I had been saving up for a new car for 2 years before finally getting one. I had finished my coffee before he came. I had been studying for hours when he called. He had worked for the company for 2 years before being promoted. I was hoping to hear from him, but I hadn't. I went to the store before I found the dress. I searched for 15 minutes before I found my keys. I was looking for a job for 2 months before I found a job. He had studied English for 5 years before moving to the United States. They had been married for 10 years before their divorce. We were friends for a long time before we started dating. I had dinner before I started to feel sick. I spoke to my boss before I went on vacation. I was hoping to hear from my friends, so I was disappointed when they didn't call. I tried to get into the football team last year but failed. I've been hoping to buy a new car for years, so when I finally got one, I was thrilled. Before testing, I studied the material. Examples. I had already had my breakfast before she woke up. They had already finished the project when I arrived. I've already read that book. I had already done my homework. I had already taken a shower. I had already brushed my teeth. I was already wearing my clothes. I had already eaten lunch by the time he woke up. By the time he woke up, I had already gone to the market. When he awoke, I was already gone. I was already in bed when he woke up. I had already turned off the lights by the time he woke up. I had already locked the door before she woke up. I was already wearing my pajamas by the time he woke up. I had already combed my hair by the time he woke up. By the time she woke up, I had already done my makeup. By the time he awoke, I had already put on my shoes. By the time she woke up, I had already taken my bag. I was already out the door when he woke up. By the time he woke up, I had already gone to work. By the time he woke up, I had already entered. I had already started my shift when he woke up. By the time he awoke, I had already taken my break. By the time he woke up, I was already exhausted. By the time he woke up, I had already gone home. By the time he awoke, I had already taken off my shoes. By the time he awoke, I had already taken off my clothes. By the time she woke up, I had already taken a shower. I was already in bed when he woke up. By the time he awoke, I had already said my prayer. I was already wearing my nightgown when she woke up. I had already turned off the TV by the time he woke up. I had already turned off the lamp by the time he woke up. I had already set my alarm before he woke up. I had already given my dog a bath before he woke up. By the time she woke up, I had already put the dishes in the dishwasher. I had already taken out the trash by the time he woke up. I had already put the kids to bed by the time he woke up. I had already cleaned the kitchen by the time he woke up. By the time she woke up, I had already done the laundry. I had already mopped the floor by the time he woke up. I had already vacuumed the carpet by the time she woke up. I had already dusted the furniture by the time he woke up. By the time she woke up, I had already made the bed. By the time she woke up, I had already loaded the dishes. I had already removed the laundry by the time she woke up. I had already swept the floor before he woke up. I worked hard all day and I'm tired. Example. We had dinner before they got home. He had cleaned the house before he came home from work. They had gone to bed before I came. I did the laundry before I came home from work. We had finished the project before they came. He had prepared dinner before he came home from work. They were in bed before I got home from work. I had washed the dishes before he came. We had cleaned the house before they came home. I hadn't seen the movie, so I didn't know what to expect. He had a haircut before the party. I made dinner before I came home from that job. We hadn't spoken in a while, so I didn't know what to say. Examples. I looked out the window and saw the rain. I've been studying for the exam all week but I still failed. I had gone to the store before I realized I had forgotten my wallet at home. I made a cake but forgot to put eggs in it. I had my hair cut but I didn't like it. I took out the trash but forgot to close the lid. I had done my homework, but when the teacher asked for it, I couldn't find it. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. I had turned off the lights, but I still felt that something was watching me. I had prepared dinner before my husband came home from work. I had studied for the exam before I took the exam. I had been taking guitar lessons for 6 months before I gave up. I had been dating for 2 years before Sarah broke up with me. I had been studying English for 2 years before I moved to England. I was married for 6 years before my wife left me. I had my breakfast before going to work. I had had lunch before I realized I forgot my wallet at home. I went to bed but couldn't sleep because I was too nervous for the next day's interview.